The south loading bay door of the Caldwell cannery had not been properly locked since 1986, and Rhea Castellan had known this for 11 mornings before the man who owned the building found out she did. She was on the second floor when she heard him come in. Not the night security guard. She had learned his route on day 3, and he did not come through the bay. This was a different step entirely, deliberate, slightly uneven, carrying weight it had been taught not to show. She did not run. Running would have been sensible, and she had stopped being sensible the morning the orange demolition notice went up on the plywood over the cannery's windows, with a date on it she couldn't stop looking at. March 28th, 41 days away. She kept photographing instead. Put the camera down. The voice came from the stairwell, low and controlled, the specific register of a man who had spent years ensuring it never needed to rise in order to be obeyed. She turned around. He was standing in the foreman's office doorway with a torch in his left hand, the right hand hanging at his side with a stillness that told her more than the brace on his wrist did. Mid-40s, wool coat, hair that the harbor wind had made its own opinion about. He swept the torch once around the room, taking in her tripod, the measuring tape unfurled across the cedar floor, the notebook open to a hand-drawn elevation of the south wall. "You're not the night security," she said. "No." He looked at the camera, then at the copper ceiling plates she'd been photographing, then at the tide mark on the far wall where salt water had been making its annual record for a century. Something crossed his face. Not anger. She had expected anger. A recalibration. The expression of a man who has walked into a room and found it larger than the floor plan suggested. "What are you doing in my building?" Rhea Castellan, Heritage Designation Specialist, unauthorized occupant, 34 years old and operating on 3 hours of sleep, said the first true thing that came to her. "Documenting it before you destroy it." He looked at her for a long moment. Outside, the copper salmon weather vane on the peak of the roof turned in the wind off the harbor, its old bearings giving a low particular groan she had come to think of as the building's way of telling you which direction the weather was going. "Who are you?" he said. She pulled the lanyard from under her jacket, university seal, certification number. "Rhea Castellan, architectural conservationist. I filed a preliminary heritage designation inquiry on the Caldwell cannery 14 weeks ago. The provincial office is still reviewing it. The demolition permit shouldn't have cleared while a designation inquiry is active, but someone's paperwork moved faster than mine." She met his eyes. "In my experience, that means someone paid to move it." She had not planned to say the last part. It came out the way things did at 5 in the morning when you were cold and exhausted, and in love with a building that had 6 weeks left. The man looked at her for another moment. Then he said, "Maddox Herne, I own the building." A pause. "Show me what you found." She showed him. Not all of it. She was not a fool. But the ceiling plates, the original Douglas fir joists that hadn't been replaced in 100 years, the tide gauge notches cut into the south pillar by the men who'd worked the cannery through 4 decades of Pacific salmon runs. He walked behind her with his torch, and she could hear the unevenness in his step more clearly now, the way he held his right hand slightly away from his body, not trusting the surface underfoot to be entirely predictable. He had been hurt badly. That much she could read without meaning to. She was her father's daughter in this way. Tom Castellan had been a master carpenter, who had favored his shoulder for the last 12 years of his life with such naturalness that she'd been 12 before she understood it wasn't simply how he stood. "Bodies told the truth," he'd said, even when the man inside them was too proud to. "The fir joists are original 1919 construction," she said, keeping her voice the work voice. "Quarter sawn. You won't find milling like this in the province anymore. The operation that produced them closed in 1964. "I know what's in the building," Maddox said. "Then you know what you're demolishing." "I know what I paid for." He stopped under one of the ceiling plates and tilted the torch. The copper caught the angle and threw light up across his face, and she saw him go still the same way she'd gone still, the first morning she'd stood here alone, standing without comment, letting the room be what it was. "It's a good building." "It's a great one," she said, "and it doesn't have to go." He lowered the torch. "Mrs. Castellan, I have a groundbreaking in 41 days, a funding milestone in 60, and a board that has been patient with me for 11 months and is finished being patient." He said it without heat, which was worse than heat. "I don't have the luxury of a great building." 11 months. The same number she'd been watching accumulate on the cannery's notice board. "What happened 11 months ago?" she said. His jaw tightened at the hinge, small, controlled. Construction site. Scaffolding in the rain, bad footing, a long fall. He said it flat. The surgeons gave me back most of the hand. That's the word they keep using. Most. She looked at the brace. The way the right hand was held still. The way you hold something you've learned to distrust. You can't sign documents, she said. Not at the volume a company my size requires, no. Can you draw anything? I used to, without self-pity, which made it land harder, not anymore. Rhea looked at her open notebook, at the elevation she'd been working on when he came in. 3 generations of hand drafting in her bloodline. Her grandfather on linen vellum with a ruling pen, her father on graph paper at the kitchen table, and her, faster and more accurate than her professors had ever found comfortable. She'd taken that as a criticism for years before she understood. It was the best thing her hands knew how to do. I can draft, she said, accurately and fast. She held it out to him. He looked at the elevation drawing for a long moment. She watched him look at it. He didn't say anything. My designation application needs 60 days minimum, she said. You need technical documentation completed for your permit extensions. Clean professional drawings that your hand can't currently produce at speed. Certified by someone whose credentials the province won't question. She put her hand out between them. Deal hand, not camera hand. 30 days. I complete your documentation. You delay the demolition order, and if the designation comes through in that time, the building stays, not pending review, permanently. She had not planned to say it so plainly. But she was standing in the Caldwell cannery in the harbour dark with the tide coming in under the floorboards and the copper ceiling doing what it did at dawn, and she had no patience left for the softened version of anything. Maddox Herne looked at her hand. You're asking me to risk my funding milestone on the chance that a provincial designation office processes an application inside 30 days, he said. I'm asking you to risk 41 days on the chance that a great building might still be standing in spring. She kept her hand out, steady. I'm faster than the provincial office. That's not a claim. It's my record. From somewhere below, a door opened. Footsteps on the ground floor and a woman's voice, dry as August in the Okanagan, rose through the old furboards. Mr. Herne, I've watched that torch wander the second floor for 20 minutes, and I've made coffee that will go cold in the time it takes you to settle whatever you're settling up there. Maddox closed his eyes for half a second, the look of a man who employs people who are not remotely concerned about him. That's Mrs. Poulin, he said. She's managed the property since 1997. She came with the deed. I like her already, Rhea said. Everyone does. He looked at her hand one more time, and then he took it. His grip was his left hand, not his right. Warm and dry and steadier than she'd expected. 30 days. Clean drawings, provincial certification, nothing in those 30 days that gives Philip Cato cause to tell me I've allowed a trespasser to make my regulatory decisions for me. Who's Philip Cato? My VP of Development. He manages the Caldwell project. He believes he manages several other things as well. Mrs. Poulin set the coffee on the old foreman's desk without being asked, and looked Rhea up and down with the calm, interested gaze of a woman who had spent 27 years watching people make decisions about a building she understood better than any of them, and had learned not to hope, and had not quite managed to stop. You're the one coming in through the South Bay, she said. The lock's been broken since 1986, Rhea said. November of it. She poured. I told the previous owner 3 times. He was a man who believed charm was a building material. She set Maddox's cup precisely where his left hand already was, 27 years of managing a property in one small, unconscious movement. So, you've hired the trespasser. She's a heritage specialist, Maddox said. She's both. Mrs. Poulin looked at Rhea with something that was not quite a smile and was better than one. Good. The last 3 consultants Philip sent were people who looked at those ceiling plates and saw cost per square foot. It was genuinely depressing. Philip Cato arrived on a Tuesday, the kind of arrival that announced itself before the door opened. He was tall and well-pressed and pleasantly handsome, the sort of good-looking that had never been required to work particularly hard, and he moved through the cannery's main floor with the ease of a man who had already decided what the floor would look like when it wasn't there. He stopped when he saw Rhea at the drafting table. You must be the conservationist, he said it the way some people said trespasser. Philip Cato, I've read your designation inquiry. His smile arrived precisely on schedule. Thorough work. It won't change the provincial timeline, but it's thorough. I've read your permit applications, Rhea said, not looking up from the elevation. They're less thorough. Something moved behind his eyes, Quick, assessing, he filed her somewhere. Rhea Castellan, Maddox said from where he stood, is handling the technical documentation for the permit extension. Her credentials are certified with the province. The same province sitting on her designation inquiry. Cato's smile widened by precisely nothing. Small world. He pulled out his phone. Speaking of the extension, Maddox, I need to talk to you about the funding timeline. The partners are asking questions. They can ask me at the February review. They're asking now. He glanced at Rhea the way you glance at furniture you're considering moving. The project needs to show forward momentum. A delay order, especially one tied to a heritage inquiry, reads as the opposite. A 30-day delay to correct documentation is standard regulatory process, Rhea said without looking up. It reads as due diligence, which is only the opposite of momentum if you've told your partners not to expect any. The room went quiet. A gull passed over the roof. The copper salmon turned. Cato looked at Maddox. She's good, he said pleasantly, and he was gone down the length of the floor and out through the loading bay, and neither of them spoke until the sound of his car faded down the harbour road. He's going to be a problem, Rhea said. He's been a problem for 11 months, Maddox said. He's a very organized one. I find it almost restful. She looked at him. He was watching the door Cato had gone through with a flatness she was beginning to understand was not coldness. It was the expression of a man who had spent a year in rooms full of people managing him, and had learned to keep his face too still to be useful to them. She went back to the elevation and said nothing about it. They worked every morning, 7 to noon, and what Rhea noticed first was that Maddox Herne listened the way people listen when they have stopped expecting to hear anything they need. She talked while she worked, the 1919 construction crew, the joinery techniques that dated the framing, the tide gauge notches in the south pillar that were, in her professional view, among the finest informal record-keeping she'd encountered in the province. He didn't ask her to stop. He asked her once how she could tell storm surge notches from ordinary tidal marks. She showed him the spacing and the chisel depth and the small variations that indicated different shift foremen. He leaned over her shoulder to look, and she felt him go very still, and she knew the quality of that stillness. She'd seen it the first morning when his torch caught the copper ceiling plates. It was the place in him that the development director and the funding partners had not yet reached. On the 9th day, she found the carpenter's mark. She'd been documenting the southeast corner, oldest surviving section of the 1919 structure, and she'd shifted a rotted floorboard to get at the joist pocket below, and there it was, cut into the wood at the pocket where no one had looked in 100 years. RH June 1919. She called him over. He stood beside her, and she held the torch steady, and she said, RH, I found the 1919 construction crew manifest in the provincial archive 2 days ago. There was a Reginald Herne listed, labourer, later journeyman. He was very still beside her. The morning light came through the gap she'd made, a thin bar of it laying across the carved initials, and Rhea kept the torch level and did not look at his face, because some things deserved the dignity of not being watched. He never mentioned this building, Maddox said, quietly. To the joist pocket, the way she'd noticed he said the things that were true. To the window, to the wall, to anything that wasn't a person who might use it. I didn't know he'd worked this part of the harbour. A lot of the men who built these canneries moved on after the season, she said. They might not have known what the buildings became. He was quiet another moment. The salmon turned in the harbour wind above them. Show me the rest, he said. Everything you've found. She showed him all of it, the full 11 days of archive work she'd been accumulating, and he looked at every piece of it with the attention of a man being handed something he had not known was missing. And Rhea Castellan, who had come to the Caldwell cannery to save a building, stood in the southeast corner where a great-great-grandfather's initials were cut into 1919 fir, and understood with the particular cold clarity of someone who reads structures for a living that she was in far more trouble than she had planned. Philip Cato called on a Thursday. She was outside the provincial archive, sitting in her car with the heat running. Mrs. Castellan, warm, prepared. I think we got off on entirely the wrong foot. I'd hate for that to sit between us given how closely we'll all be working. Could I buy you lunch? She almost said no. She said yes because she couldn't fight what she didn't understand, and because Cato had said what's his head in the tone of a man who knew something about a head that she didn't. He was already in the corner booth when she arrived, folder on the table, water glass untouched. He stood when she came in, and the gesture made her more careful, not less. You want to tell me something about the designation, she said. I want to tell you something about the man who hired you. He gestured at the chair. Please. She sat. Over the next 20 minutes he told her this. 11 months ago, after Maddox's accident, the Herne Group's funding partners had required a protective covenant, standard language, if Maddox could not demonstrate capacity to lead the company at the annual stakeholders presentation in March, 32 days away. Operational control of the Caldwell development transferred to the partners. All permits, all timelines, all decisions, including the demolition order. His signature on your delay agreement is his signature, Cato said, folding his hands on the table with the patience of a man who has rehearsed this conversation. But it holds only as long as he leads the company. The moment the partners exercise the covenant, your 30 days becomes someone else's 30 days. Someone who hasn't made any promises about great buildings. Rhea kept her face level. The morning tilted under her. You're telling me this, she said, because you want the covenant exercised, so why hand me the one fact that tells me how much harder I need to work? Cato looked at her with something that was almost genuine. The look of someone who has made a move they weren't expecting to be seen. Because I don't want the building to save him, he said quietly. I want the building to be why the numbers didn't work. Clean and on record. The heritage inquiry caused delay. Delay caused overruns. Overruns caused the milestone to fail. That's not a personal defeat. That's regulatory risk. Nobody questions Maddox. Everyone moves on. He straightened his folder, including me, into a role the partners have already discussed at some length. His smile reached his eyes, which was the most troubling thing his face had done all afternoon. Do excellent work, Miss Castellan. I mean that sincerely. Heal this project beautifully. It changes nothing about who owns the cannery on the far side of the gala. She left the water glass. She left the folder. She drove back to Victoria with her hands on the wheel and understood that the race had been fixed before she'd arrived, and that she had been brought in specifically to run it. She went back to the cannery that afternoon instead of waiting for morning. Maddox was on the ground floor, at the window facing the inlet, right hand in his coat pocket the way he kept it when he thought no one was watching. He turned when she came in, and before he could speak, she said it plainly. Cato, the covenant, the stakeholders' presentation. The way his delay order was only his to give as long as he held the company, which was exactly 32 more days. He's not lying, she said, is he? No, the word cost him the same way it always did. He's not. Then tell me the rest. The part he doesn't have. He was quiet for a moment. The tide moved under the old planks, small and patient. Then he told her. The full scope, the covenant, the manufactured funding gap. The way Cato had spent 11 months ensuring the milestone shortfall was real and not theoretical. The way the Caldwell project had been structured so that any act of good faith, any delay, any consideration of a heritage inquiry, became the precise mechanism of Maddox's undoing. You let me make the deal, Rhea said. You knew the ground was narrow, and you let me drive home and tell my mother the building might survive. She did not raise her voice. The worst of what she said level. I knew it was the truest thing I could give you at 5 in the morning, he said. His right hand tightened in his pocket, visible through the wool. I had been managed by everyone around me for 11 months. Every person in this company giving me the smooth version of everything. And you walked into my building and told me in the first 3 minutes that someone had paid to move permits faster than your paperwork. He looked at her. I thought if I gave you something true, even a narrow true thing, you might give me something true back. You gave me my great-great-grandfather's initials and 12 days of the most honest work I've seen in this company in a year. I was afraid that if you saw how narrow the ground was, you'd stop. A pause. That is the honest answer. I don't have a better one. The tide came in. The salmon weather vane groaned once west-northwest. Show me the hand, she said. He hesitated. Then he took it out of his pocket. She looked at it, the way she looked at the joinery in the southeast corner. The way her father had taught her to look at a structure that had been through something and was still upright. You've been guarding it, she said. Not moving it, which means you've lost 2 months of recovery you could have had. The surgeons reassess in 4 months. You have 32 days until the stakeholders' presentation, which, if I understand the covenant, is also the day you need to demonstrate capacity. She met his eyes. Can you write at all, even slowly? He looked at the hand. Something moved in his face. The one beneath the boardroom one, younger and more tired and less certain of being seen. Some days, he said, some letters. Then that's where we start, she said. Both things, the designation and the hand. She found the nail on a Wednesday 14 days in at the Provincial Land Title Office in Victoria. She had pulled the original 1919 deed of the property and its subsequent transfer documents because she was always thorough. And she had read all 11 pages because she was her grandfather's granddaughter. And she found it in a subclause on page 11 that appeared to have been read by no one in the 28 years since the transfer was registered. In the event that the subject property receives designation under the Provincial Heritage Act prior to the completion of any development, the registered owner of record retains sole authority to execute the designation acceptance without requirement of board approval or partner consent. She sat with it under the fluorescent lights of the archive reading room for a long time. Cato had written the covenant to catch a man who couldn't demonstrate capacity. He had never once looked at what the deed already said. He had built a lock around the building and forgotten that someone else had put in a different door. She drove to the cannery. Maddox was at the work table, a drawing spread in front of him, his right hand moving over a tracing with the deliberate care of someone learning a thing rather than performing it. He'd been trying on his own. She could see it in the hesitation in the lines, the places where the hand had attempted something and backed off and tried again. She set the photocopy on the table in front of him. He read it once, twice, then he looked at her. He never read page 11, Maddox said. He built the covenant to prove you couldn't walk into a room whole, she said. He never considered what happened if you could. Something moved across his face. She had a shelf for it now. The same expression she'd seen in the southeast corner on the 9th day, the look of a man being handed something he didn't know he'd lost. If the designation comes through before the stakeholders' presentation, he said carefully, and I sign the acceptance. The building is permanently protected. No partner vote, no board approval. She sat down. And the stakeholders' presentation becomes the moment you walked in and demonstrated that you were the one who read the room. A pause. You lose the resort development. The milestone fails. The company transfers to partner control on the covenant terms. I know, he said. I know you know, she said. I'm asking if you're going to do it anyway. He was quiet. The tide, the weather vane, the sound the old cannery made when the afternoon light hit the south-facing copper at this angle. I signed a covenant from a hospital bed 11 months ago because 900 people's employment was tied to this company surviving me, he said. I don't regret that. He turned the photocopy over in his left hand. I spent 11 months since then being handled by the people I trusted to help me run it. Cato moved my permits. He manufactured a shortfall. He invited a woman he thought would accelerate the demolition, and instead she found my great-great-grandfather's initials in the southeast corner. He looked at her. I'm not regretful in general, but I am very, very tired of being managed. She had heard that before. She'd been hearing it in pieces since the first morning, in the things he gave to walls and windows instead of to people. She heard the whole of it now. I'm your authorized signatory on the designation application, she said. You signed that on day one when you gave me the documentation authority. Legally, either of us can execute the acceptance. I know, he said. I want to sign it myself. She looked at his right hand on the table. Then we have 2 weeks, she said. Let's not waste them. The Herne Group's annual stakeholders presentation was held in the Harbour Club's main room, glass on 3 sides and the inlet going pewter below, and 50 people in clothing that cost more than Rhea's car. And she came into it in the dark green blazer her mother had pressed, because Rhea Castellan believed you showed up to the things that mattered dressed like you knew they mattered. She arrived early. Cato was already there, near the podium, folder under his arm, phone in hand, pleasant face fully assembled. Behind him on the easel was the resort rendering, glass curves, imported granite, a long manicured waterfront where the Caldwell Cannery had stood for 100 years. He found her in under a minute. Miss Castellan. He crossed the room with the ease of a man who has already won. I'm glad you came. However it goes this morning, I want you to know the work you did on those permit drawings was genuinely excellent. That part wasn't managed. I know, she said. It never is. The room shifted. Not the people, not yet. A change in the air, the way a building settles before something becomes permanent. Maddox came in from the east entrance. Dark jacket, no coat. Right hand visible at his side, not hidden, not guarded, held with the deliberate quality of a hand that had been spending 2 weeks relearning what it could do. He crossed the room. Not fast, not staged. Just walking, with the slight unevenness of a man whose body had been through 11 months of something hard and was still in use. Every person in the room watched him, and not one of them looked at his hand because he was not looking at it either. He went to the podium. He looked once at the resort rendering. Then he reached into his jacket and set a document on the lectern. The Heritage Designation Acceptance, Provincial Seal, File Number, the Caldwell Cannery 1919 construction typed in full. 2 signature lines. "This is going to take me a little longer than it used to," he said. No boardroom voice. The one that lived under it, the one she'd first heard in the southeast corner on day 9, offered now without anything held back. "So I'll be clear. The Caldwell Cannery received Provisional Heritage Designation this morning. I'm accepting it under the terms of the original property deed, sole authority, no board approval required." He looked at Philip Cato across the room. Page 11. Cato's pleasant face did something she had not seen it do before. It went uncertain. He opened his folder and looked at something in it, and his jaw did a thing she recognized. "The resort development milestone fails as a result," Maddox continued. "Operational control of the company transfers to the partners on the covenant terms. I accept that." He picked up the pen in his right hand. The room held very still. He signed, slowly, clearly. His hand shook slightly on the final letter and steadied, and he capped the pen, and it was done. He slid the document to Rhea, and she signed beneath him. Authorized signatory, Rhea Castellan. Her handwriting fast and certain, the most legible thing in the room. Cato stood with his folder and his phone and his resort rendering and said, for the first time in Rhea's experience, absolutely nothing at all. The silver-haired partner at the end of the table was looking at him with an expression that had rearranged itself since the morning. He gathered his things. He didn't take the pen. He walked out through the east doors and did not look back, and the doors settled closed behind him with the quiet sound of a door that has nothing dramatic left to offer. The designation was published in the Provincial Register 6 days later. Caldwell Cannery, Victoria Harbour District, 1919, Pacific Coast Cannery construction, original Douglas fir joinery, copper ceiling plates, tide gauge record intact, permanent. Maddox restructured. The process took months and cost him things she did not ask him to enumerate, and he did not enumerate them. He bought back what was indisputably his: the lodge property, the waterfront strip, the deed to the cannery building. The Herne Group's new partners spent 3 months reading Cato's 12 months of documentation very carefully, as Maddox had quietly suggested they might. The way the funding gap had been manufactured through misdirected invoicing and delayed permits became clear in time. The partners thanked Cato for his service and showed him the door with a resolution and 4 signatures, and a great deal less ceremony than he had shown anyone, and the market continued to be the market. Mrs. Poulin stayed. Of course she stayed. She had told them both separately, on the same Tuesday at different hours, with the serene efficiency of a woman who had been running a property since the Chrétien years, that she had managed the Caldwell building for 27 years and intended to manage it for another 20, and that the only addition she intended to acknowledge was the heritage designation sign on the South Bay door, which she had personally selected from the provincial registry font options and bolted up herself. The South Bay lock, she also made clear, was not to be touched. It had been broken since 1986, and that was the condition of it, and she had told the previous owner 3 times and the current owner once, and she was not going to tell anyone a second time. On the first Thursday of May, Rhea came back to the cannery with her measuring tape and her notebook, because the adaptive reuse proposal needed revised floor plans, and the light through the southeast corner at this hour was still the best working light she had ever found. She parked in the designated lot. There was a designated lot now, and a proper entrance, and a sign in the provincial serif font that she had always found quietly reassuring. And she came in through the South Bay, because the South Bay door was open, and the lock was still broken, and some things should stay the way they were found. Maddox was at the work table, drawings spread in front of him, right hand moving over a tracing with the slow, deliberate care of someone doing a thing properly rather than quickly. He had been working with an occupational therapist for 8 weeks. She had found a set of drawing pencils on the table one morning about a month ago, and had not commented on them, and he had not commented on them either. And they were still there. He looked up when she came in. The adaptive reuse concept has a problem with the southeast corner column placement, he said. I know. I was going to move the load to the north elevation. He turned the paper toward her. His sketch was rough, nothing like what her hands produced, and nothing yet like what his had produced before the scaffolding. But the column was exactly where she would have put it, and it was his, and it was clear. She looked at it for a moment, then at his hand. "Your father built things," she said. "He did. So did yours." She set down her measuring tape. "In 1919, in that corner." She looked at the southeast wall, the morning light coming through exactly the way it had come through on 11 consecutive mornings before he'd found her. "I think you were always going to keep this building, Maddox. You just needed someone to find the initials." He was quiet in the way he was quiet when something true landed in a place it couldn't be argued with. Above them, the copper salmon turned in the May wind coming off the water, its old bearings giving the low particular groan that she had come, over the course of 41 mornings, to read as accurately as any weather instrument she'd ever used. "You still came through the South Bay," he said. "Mrs. Poulin left it open." "I told her to." Not the CEO voice, not the managed one, the one below both. Some things should stay exactly the way they were found. The tide came in under the old fir floor with the small patient sound it had been making for 100 years. The copper ceiling plates did what they did in the May light, and the quarter-sawn joists held the same as they had held since the crew that included a man named R.H. had set them in June of 1919, and Rhea Castellan opened her notebook to a clean page and picked up her pencil and went to work in the building she had come to save, beside the man who had let her, and outside in the harbour wind the salmon turned and turned, pointing the direction the weather was going, the same as it always had, the same as it always would. If you've stayed with Rhea and Maddox all the way to this quiet corner of the cannery, thank you, genuinely. Stories like this one, about the people who read what everyone else walks past, and who show up before dawn for the things worth keeping, are exactly what we bring you here at Platinum Files, every week. If you believe a building that has held a century of tide marks and carpenter's initials deserves better than a resort rendering and a wrecking permit, subscribe and stay close. Leave a comment and tell us the moment the story turned for you. And until next time, keep reading, page 11. That's always where the real thing is.